If you love stories about revenge, forbidden love, and powerful men learning too late what they lost, subscribe now and stay until the end of this story. Because tonight's tale begins with a wedding built on humiliation and ends with a truth that should have buried a duke. The bells of Blackthorn Cathedral rang through the winter fog while every noble family in Norhaven whispered the same thing behind silk gloves and jeweled fans. Poor girl. Lady Eleanor Vale heard every word. She stood alone at the front of the cathedral in a gown chosen not by herself, but by the Duke of Ravenshire's mother. Ivory silk, tight sleeves, no diamonds, nothing that looked too proud. Nothing that would allow a merchant's daughter to forget her place among old blood. At the far end of the aisle, Duke Adrian Ravenshire barely looked at her. The man was dangerously handsome in the cold way. Storms were beautiful. Dark hair, sharp jaw, eyes that always seemed irritated by the existence of other people. The women of court adored him because he carried grief like armor and arrogance like a crown. Eleanor hated him already, not because he was cruel, because he was disappointed. There was something strangely painful about being looked at like a burden before a marriage had even begun. "Smile," whispered her aunt beside her. "Half the kingdom would kill for this match." Eleanor forced her lips upward. Half the kingdom did not know what desperation looked like behind palace doors. Her father's shipping company had nearly collapsed after the northern trade freeze. The crown wanted stronger alliances between noble houses and wealthy industrial families. This marriage was business disguised as romance, exactly the way many royal marriages had worked throughout history. In newspapers and documentaries, people always imagined grand love stories between aristocrats. The truth was usually negotiation, debt, politics, inheritance, and survival. Adrian finally approached the altar. Not once did he offer his hand. The bishop smiled nervously. "Your Grace, Lady Eleanor, shall we begin?" Adrian's voice was flat. "Let us finish it." The words cut deeper than Eleanor expected. The ceremony moved forward anyway. Vows echoed beneath painted ceilings while candlelight flickered across stone saints overhead. Eleanor repeated every promise calmly, but Adrian sounded like a man reading terms from a contract he regretted signing. Then came the moment that humiliated her. "Lift her veil," the bishop instructed softly. Adrian stared at Eleanor for 2 long seconds. Then he leaned close enough for only her to hear. "Do not mistake this arrangement for affection." The cathedral disappeared around her. That sentence landed with the quiet brutality of truth. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest enough to wound permanently. Still, Eleanor lifted her chin. "Trust me," she whispered back. "I would never make that mistake." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt, interest. The marriage ended under applause that sounded hollow to both of them. Hours later, the royal reception filled Ravenshire Palace with music, crystal glasses, and the suffocating perfume of powerful people pretending to enjoy one another. Politicians drank beside generals. Countesses traded scandals near marble pillars. Investors circled the duke's family like wolves, sensing wounded prey. Eleanor stood alone near the ballroom staircase while servants refreshed untouched champagne around her. No husband beside her. No kindness either. "She's prettier than I expected," one woman whispered. "But common. A rich commoner is still common." Eleanor continued smiling while every insult slid carefully beneath her skin. That was the strange thing about humiliation. Most people imagine explosive moments. In reality, humiliation arrives slowly, one small cut at a time, until dignity bled quietly inside you. A shadow appeared beside her. Lord Cedric Montrose, young, charming, dangerous in the way gamblers usually were. "Your Grace," he said with a bow, "you look abandoned already." Eleanor exhaled softly. "You nobles truly waste no time," Cedric grinned. "We survive on entertainment. And tonight, your husband has provided plenty." Across the ballroom, Adrian stood surrounded by military officers and parliament ministers. He laughed at something one of them said, though his eyes drifted toward Eleanor more often than he realized. Cedric noticed immediately. "Oh," he murmured. "That annoys him." "What does that? I'm speaking to you." Eleanor glanced toward her husband. Adrian was watching now, coldly, possessively, as if he disliked her, but disliked the idea of someone else approaching her even more. Human beings had always been strange that way. "Careful," Eleanor said. "He may challenge you to a duel." Cedric laughed. "For a woman he clearly does not want." Before Eleanor could answer, Adrian crossed the ballroom toward them. The entire energy of the room shifted. That was power. Real power, not loudness, presence. Adrian stopped beside Eleanor and addressed Cedric without warmth. "You seem comfortable near my wife." Cedric raised his glass. "I was welcoming her since you disappeared after the ceremony." The insult landed cleanly. Adrian's jaw tightened. Eleanor expected an argument, but instead Adrian turned toward her with controlled politeness that somehow felt crueler than anger. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be exhausting for you." "For me?" Eleanor asked quietly. The responsibilities of becoming a duchess require adjustment. There it was again, that tone. As though she were an outsider invited accidentally into a world she could never truly understand. Something inside her hardened. "My father built an empire from 2 cargo ships," she replied. "I assure you, Your Grace, I understand responsibility." A dangerous silence followed. Cedric looked delighted. Adrian stepped closer. Close enough for Eleanor to smell cedar and smoke on his coat. "You misunderstand me," he said quietly. "I simply prefer peace inside my home, and I prefer honesty inside mine." For one sharp second, tension sparked between them so intensely it almost resembled attraction. Then Adrian pulled away first. "Enjoy the evening," he said coldly. He walked off without another glance. But Eleanor noticed something strange. His hands were shaking, not from anger, from memory. And upstairs, locked inside a private drawer in the Duke's study, hidden beneath years of military papers and sealed letters, rested a silver compass stained with dried blood. A compass belonging to the girl who had once dragged Adrian Ravenshire from a frozen river during the war 6 years earlier. The same girl whose face he had never forgotten. The same girl he had just married without recognizing. The first snowfall arrived the morning after the wedding. Ravenshire Palace looked beautiful beneath winter frost, but Eleanor quickly learned beautiful places often hid the coldest people. Servants bowed to her respectfully, yet cautiously, as though uncertain whether the new duchess would survive the season. Old aristocratic households operated like private kingdoms. Loyalty mattered. Bloodlines mattered more, and Eleanor had neither history nor allies there. She sat quietly in the breakfast room while rain-gray light filtered through towering windows. Across from her, Adrian scanned parliamentary reports without acknowledging her existence. No greeting, no eye contact, only silence sharp enough to bruise. Eleanor reached for tea calmly. "Does your family always dine like political hostages?" Adrian turned a page. "Conversation requires mutual interest. Then we are doomed already." A servant accidentally dropped a spoon nearby. The poor girl looked terrified. Eleanor noticed immediately because she recognized that kind of fear. Working-class people survived by avoiding the anger of powerful households. One mistake could cost wages, housing, dignity. "It's all right," Eleanor told the servant gently. "No harm done." The girl looked stunned by the kindness. Adrian noticed that too. For the first time since their marriage, he actually studied his wife, instead of merely tolerating her presence. There was no performance in her behavior, no calculated sweetness. She spoke to servants the same way she spoke to nobles, directly, humanly. It unsettled him more than arrogance would have. "You are unusually relaxed around staff," he remarked. "My father employed over 400 workers," Eleanor replied. "He taught me that people remember how you treat them when they have nothing to offer you." Adrian's expression shifted slightly. That sentence struck somewhere deeper than she intended. Because 6 years earlier, broken and half-conscious after the Northern Rebellion, Adrian had learned the exact same lesson from a stranger, a girl with trembling hands and fearless eyes. He pushed the memory away immediately. Outside, thunder rolled faintly through the winter sky. "You'll attend Parliament with me tonight," Adrian said suddenly. Eleanor blinked. "That sounds less like an invitation and more like military deployment." "It is important. For politics? For appearances," there it was again. Not wife, not partner, decoration. Eleanor smiled faintly, but disappointment moved quietly through her chest. "Understood, Your Grace." Hours later, black carriages lined the Royal Assembly Hall while journalists gathered outside beneath gas lanterns and falling snow. Public fascination with aristocratic marriages had always existed. Even in modern times, people obsessed over royal weddings because wealth and power created fantasies ordinary life rarely offered. But behind every famous union lived pressure invisible to outsiders. Tonight, Eleanor felt every ounce of it. As she entered Adrian's side beneath flashing cameras, conversations immediately erupted across the hall. "That's the new Duchess? She's stunning." He still didn't want the marriage. "They say Ravenshire needed her father's money." Eleanor kept walking, head high, shoulders steady. Her survival instinct had sharpened long before she entered noble society. Inside the assembly chamber, Adrian became someone different. Commanding, focused, dangerously intelligent. Men twice his age listened when he spoke. Ministers interrupted one another but never interrupted him. Eleanor watched quietly as he negotiated trade protections and military funding with the precision of a battlefield strategist. For the first time, she understood why people feared him, and why women fell in love with him despite themselves. Then came the moment everything shifted. A senior minister approached Eleanor during intermission, Lord Whitmore, old enough to know better, cruel enough not to care. "So," he said loudly, "the kingdom's most expensive bride finally arrives." Nearby conversations slowed. People listened. Eleanor smiled politely. "Good evening to you as well." Whitmore chuckled. Tell me, Duchess, how does it feel purchasing nobility? Adrian turned instantly from across the chamber. The room tightened with tension. This was how elite society destroyed people, rarely with violence, usually with embarrassment disguised as humor. Eleanor could feel dozens of eyes waiting for her humiliation. Then she answered calmly. My father purchased ships, rail lines, factories, and hospitals, she said. The title came free afterward. Several people choked back laughter. Whitmore's face darkened. Adrian stared at her differently now, not mockingly, carefully, as though discovering hidden steel beneath silk. Whitmore recovered with a sneer. Money still cannot buy breeding. Eleanor tilted her head slightly. No, she agreed softly. But apparently breeding cannot buy basic manners either. Silence exploded through the chamber. A few nobles actually laughed aloud. Whitmore stormed off humiliated, and Adrian almost smiled. Almost. Later that evening, while snow-battered palace windows, Eleanor wandered Ravenshire's Western Library, unable to sleep. Thousands of books towered toward painted ceilings while fireplaces crackled softly in the darkness. She loved libraries, always had. Because books never cared where someone came from. You insulted a royal minister tonight. Adrian's voice startled her. He stood near the doorway, still wearing his dark formal coat, one hand tucked behind his back. Eleanor closed her book slowly. Was I meant to apologize for existing instead? No. The answer surprised both of them. He walked deeper into the room. There are easier ways to survive court politics. I'm not trying to survive it, Eleanor replied. I'm trying to keep it from swallowing me whole. Something flickered across his face again. Recognition, not of her identity, of her spirit, the same stubborn courage, the same refusal to bend under pressure. A dangerous memory stirred unexpectedly. Snow blood. Freezing water. A girl shouting at him to stay awake. Adrian's jaw tightened sharply. What happened to your wrist? He asked suddenly. Eleanor instinctively covered the faint scar near her sleeve. This? She asked carefully. Yes, old injury. How old? 6 years. The room went still. Adrian's pulse stumbled once. Exactly 6 years ago, the unknown girl who saved his life had burned her wrist, pulling him through shattered river ice. Impossible? His mind rejected it instantly. Eleanor noticed his expression darken. What is it? Nothing. But it was not nothing, not even close. Because upstairs in his private study rested the blood-stained compass engraved with initials he had searched for unsuccessfully across half the kingdom. E.V. Eleanor Vale. And for the first time since their marriage, Adrian Ravenshire felt something far more dangerous than irritation beginning to grow inside him. Hope. Adrian did not sleep that night. The storm outside intensified after midnight, wind clawing against the palace windows while old fireplaces groaned through the halls of Ravenshire Manor. Most of the household slept peacefully beneath velvet blankets and carved ceilings. But the Duke of Ravenshire sat alone in his study staring at a silver compass stained with 6-year-old blood. E.V. His fingers tightened around it. For years he had searched military records, refugee camps, field hospitals, even border towns destroyed during the rebellion. He never found the girl who dragged him from the frozen river after the ambush at Blackmere Crossing. The doctors called his survival impossible. His officers called it luck. Adrian called it debt, because he still remembered her voice. Stay awake. Look at me. You do not get to die here. He remembered freezing water filling his lungs, gunfire in the distance. Her bleeding hands pulling him through broken ice while soldiers fled the battlefield. He remembered one more thing too. Brown eyes full of fury. The same eyes now sitting across from him at breakfast every morning. No, Adrian muttered to himself. It could not be Eleanor. The daughter of one of the richest industrial families in Norhaven would never have been near a battlefield refugee zone during wartime. Yet the scar, the initials, the timing. Every answer created another question. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. His longtime steward stepped inside carefully. Your Grace, Lady Eleanor requested permission to visit the lower village today. Adrian frowned. Why? She wishes to inspect the winter shelters funded by her father's foundation. That surprised him again. Most duchesses spent their first weeks arranging gowns, hosting dinners, and securing social alliances. Eleanor wanted to inspect shelters. Take additional guards, Adrian ordered automatically. She already left, Your Grace. Of course she had. Adrian exhaled sharply and stood. 2 hours later, Ravenshire village buzzed with cold-weather markets, horse carts, and chimney smoke rising into pale skies. Workers hurried through muddy streets while children chased one another between shops. Eleanor moved quietly among them without the performance nobles usually carried into poor districts. She listened more than she spoke. That alone made people trust her. Your Grace, said an elderly woman near the bakery, the coal delivery last winter saved dozens of families. Eleanor smiled gently. My father organized that shipment, not me. Still, the woman replied, squeezing Eleanor's hand, most rich people never come back to see whether help actually arrived. That sentence stayed with Eleanor, because it was true. Public charity often existed for appearances. Newspapers loved photographs of powerful families helping the poor. Real compassion required inconvenience, and inconvenience was something privilege usually avoided. A carriage suddenly stopped near the market square. Adrian stepped out. Conversations instantly shifted. Workers straightened nervously while shopkeepers bowed their heads. The Duke carried authority the way soldiers carried weapons, naturally. Eleanor looked genuinely confused to see him. You followed me, you left without security. I brought guards. You brought two elderly men and a driver with arthritis. Eleanor laughed unexpectedly. The sound caught him off guard. Not delicate, not calculated, real. For one dangerous second, Adrian forgot why he disliked this marriage at all. Then shouting erupted nearby. A horse broke loose from a supply cart, panicked by crashing barrels. The animal charged wildly through the crowded square while people scattered in fear.
You know what makes this story hurt so much? It's not the arrogance, it's the regret. Adrian spent years searching for the woman who saved his life, only to destroy her quietly the moment he found her. And the worst part? Eleanor never hated him enough to expose the truth. She just endured it. That kind of silence changes people. So, tell me honestly, if you were Eleanor, would you have told him the truth immediately? Or let him live with his mistake?
A little boy froze directly in its path. Everything happened instantly. The mother screamed. Crowds moved backward, and Eleanor ran forward, without hesitation, without thinking. Adrian watched in shock as she threw herself toward the child, seconds before the horse thundered past. They hit the muddy ground hard together while crates shattered nearby. The square fell silent. Eleanor curled protectively around the frightened boy while mud stained her expensive coat. Are you hurt? She asked him breathlessly. The child shook his head, crying. Adrian reached them seconds later, pulse hammering harder than it should have. What were you thinking? He snapped. Eleanor looked up at him from the ground. The child would have died. So could you. Her expression changed slightly. Then she stood slowly, brushing dirt from her gloves. When people are in danger, she said quietly, you act first. Fear comes later. Adrian froze. Those exact words. Not similar. Exact. 6 years ago, half-conscious beside the frozen riverbank, he heard those same words while blood soaked through military snow. Fear comes later. The world around him seemed to tilt. Eleanor noticed his face pale. Adrian. He stared at her. Not as a husband. Not as a duke. As a man standing inches away from a ghost. You said that before, he murmured. What? That sentence. Eleanor blinked in confusion. But before she could answer, the little boy's mother rushed forward sobbing with gratitude. Villagers gathered around Eleanor immediately, thanking her, blessing her, praising her courage. Adrian stepped back slowly, watching, remembering, and suddenly noticing things he should have seen earlier. The scar on her wrist, her instinct under pressure, the way she spoke to frighten people, even the faint limp she occasionally carried during cold weather. His chest tightened sharply, because the girl from the river had limped afterward too. Back at the palace that evening, Adrian unlocked the hidden drawer in his study with shaking hands. Inside rested the compass, and beneath it, an old military report. Blackmere Crossing survivor statement. The document described the unidentified civilian woman who rescued the Duke during the rebellion. Adrian had read it dozens of times over the years, searching for clues he somehow missed. Tonight, one line nearly stopped his breathing. Witness stated the girl mentioned her father owned northern cargo vessels delivering medical supplies before the attack. Cargo vessels. Eleanor's father owned the largest shipping fleet in the north during the war. Adrian sat down slowly. Every wall inside his mind collapsed at once. He remembered mocking her at the altar, treating her like an inconvenience, looking down on her family, while all along, she was the reason he survived long enough to stand there at all. And for the first time in years, Adrian Ravenshire felt something he could neither command nor suppress. Shame. Deep, violent, unforgiving shame. Meanwhile, across the palace, Eleanor stood alone on her balcony watching snow fall beyond the gardens, unaware that the man who humiliated her had finally begun uncovering the truth because Adrian still did not know the worst part. Eleanor had recognized him the very first moment she saw him at the altar, and she married him anyway. Liza's another powerful man is secretly trying to take his wife from him. Continue now. Adrian avoided Eleanor for 2 days, not out of anger, out of guilt. The realization followed him everywhere now, through parliamentary meetings, through military briefings, through silent dinners where Eleanor sat across from him completely unaware that every time he looked at her, he remembered icy water and blood-stained snow. Or perhaps she was aware. That possibility disturbed him most. Because if Eleanor truly recognized him from the beginning, then she had endured every cold remark, every dismissal, every humiliation while carrying the knowledge that she once saved his life. And she never used it against him. That level of restraint unsettled a man accustomed to power. On the third evening, Ravenshire Palace hosted a winter charity gala attended by nearly every influential family in Norhaven. Crystal chandeliers glowed above hundreds of guests, while a string orchestra filled the ballroom with music soft enough to hide dangerous conversations. Publicly, Adrian and Eleanor looked perfect together. That was the tragedy of aristocratic marriages throughout history. The prettier the appearance, the uglier the silence usually became behind closed doors. "You're staring again," Cedric Montrose said, beside Adrian. Adrian took a slow sip of whiskey. "At whom?" Cedric smirked openly. "Your wife." Across the ballroom, Eleanor stood speaking with several women near the marble staircase. Tonight she wore dark emerald silk with almost no jewelry, yet somehow drew attention more effortlessly than women covered in diamonds. People liked watching confidence, especially confidence born from survival. "She's adapting quickly," Cedric continued. "She is stubborn, that too." Adrian glanced toward him sharply. "You seem unusually interested in my marriage," Cedric laughed softly. "No. I'm interested in watching a man realize his wife is extraordinary several months too late." The statement landed harder than expected. Before Adrian could respond, applause erupted near the orchestra platform. A royal councilman began announcing donor recognitions for winter relief programs. Eleanor's father's foundation received the loudest applause of the evening, not because of wealth, because thousands of workers had survived the northern freeze due to those supply shipments years earlier. Real acts of service always outlived gossip. Adrian looked toward Eleanor again, and finally understood something deeply uncomfortable. He had judged her before knowing her, not because she lacked worth, because society trained men like him to believe lineage mattered more than character. History was full of that mistake. Powerful families rejecting outsiders until war, disaster, or economic collapse forced them to admit survival depended on ordinary people too. "Your Grace," Adrian turned. An elderly military colonel stood nearby, Colonel Whitaker, one of the few surviving officers from Blackmere Crossing. "I heard your wife visited the lower village," Whitaker said warmly. "Good woman?" Adrian nodded carefully. The old colonel studied him for a long moment. "She reminds me of the girl who saved you." Adrian's chest tightened instantly. Whitaker continued casually, unaware of the storm building inside the Duke's mind. "Same eyes, same courage." "Colonel," Adrian asked quietly, "did you see the girl clearly?" "Only briefly." Whitaker frowned in thought. Dark hair, small frame, fierce temper. She nearly stabbed a soldier who tried taking medical supplies from refugees. Adrian nearly smiled despite himself. That sounded exactly like Eleanor. Then Whitaker added something else. "She wore a silver necklace with a compass charm." Adrian went completely still, because Eleanor wore that same necklace beneath her gowns almost every day. The ballroom noise faded around him. No more doubt remained. None. Eleanor was the woman who saved his life, and he had spent weeks treating her like a political inconvenience. Across the room, Eleanor suddenly looked up and met his gaze. Something changed between them instantly. For the first time since their marriage, Adrian did not look at her coldly. He looked devastated. Eleanor's expression faltered slightly. She excused herself from the group and walked toward the terrace doors for air. Adrian followed seconds later. Snow drifted softly across the palace gardens outside, while distant music echoed behind them. Eleanor stood near the stone railing, arms folded tightly against the cold. "You've been avoiding me," she said, without turning around. Adrian stopped beside her. "Yes. Why? Because I finally understand who you are. Because I owe you my life. Because every cruel thing I said now feels unforgivable." But Adrian Ravenshire had spent years mastering control. Men raised in power learned early that vulnerability could be weaponized. So instead he asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell me?" Eleanor slowly turned toward him, and in that moment he knew. She knew exactly what he meant. Her face lost color. "How long?" she whispered. "Long enough." Silence stretched painfully between them. Snow gathered along the terrace railing while distant violin music drifted through the ballroom behind them. Finally, Eleanor looked away. "I didn't save you, so you would owe me something. That isn't the point." "Then what is?" Adrian struggled for words he rarely needed. "You let me stand at that altar and speak to you like—" He stopped harshly. "God." Eleanor laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Like I was beneath you?" The truth hit cleanly. "Yes," she nodded slowly. "Because that's exactly what you believed." Adrian had no defense against honesty, delivered that calmly. Eleanor stared out at the falling snow again. "When I pulled you from that river, you were unconscious half the time. You kept trying to stand even with blood loss. You were arrogant then too." Despite the tension, Adrian almost smiled. That sounds accurate, but you thanked every refugee who shared food with injured soldiers. Her voice softened slightly. You gave your coat to a freezing child. You carried wounded men twice your size through snow. Adrian looked at her carefully. You remembered all that? I remembered everything. Those words changed the air between them. Not romantic. Not yet, but dangerously personal. Then another voice interrupted from behind. Am I interrupting something intimate? Cedric Montrose stepped onto the terrace holding 2 glasses of champagne. Adrian's entire posture hardened instantly. Cedric noticed and smiled. Eleanor accepted one of the glasses politely. Thank you. My pleasure, Cedric replied, eyes lingering on her longer than necessary. Someone should rescue you from political funerals disguised as galas. Adrian spoke before he could stop himself. My wife does not require rescuing. Cedric raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Possessiveness. Finally. But Eleanor noticed something else entirely. For the first time since their marriage, Adrian had called her his wife like it actually meant something. And that frightened her far more than his cruelty ever did, because hatred was easy to survive, hope was not. By the following week, the entire kingdom was talking about the Duchess of Ravenshire. Not because of scandal, because people trusted her. Newspapers praised Eleanor's winter relief programs after photographs surfaced of her visiting coal districts and crowded shelters without royal escorts or stage publicity. Workers spoke highly of her in taverns. Mothers praised her in marketplaces. Even political commentators, who usually mocked aristocratic marriages, admitted the Duchess possessed something increasingly rare among powerful families: sincerity. Adrian watched the public reaction carefully. At first, he told himself his growing fascination came from gratitude alone. Eleanor saved his life. Naturally, he respected her. But respect did not explain why he searched for her first whenever entering a room, or why his chest tightened whenever Cedric Montrose stood too close to her during palace gatherings, or why silence felt strangely wrong whenever she was absent. None of those feelings resembled debt. They resembled danger. And Adrian Ravenshire had spent most of his adult life avoiding emotional danger at all costs. The scandal finally erupted 3 nights later during a royal council banquet, attended by ministers, generals, foreign investors, and members of the crown itself. Exactly the kind of event where reputation survived or died. The ballroom glittered beneath golden chandeliers while orchestras played softly in the background. Eleanor sat beside Adrian at the head table, calm as ever despite dozens of eyes following her movements. People admired her now. That was the problem. The higher someone rose socially, the more others searched desperately for ways to pull them back down. Lord Whitmore chose that moment to strike. Drunk enough to be reckless, cruel enough not to care. He stood suddenly during dinner, glass raised loosely in one hand. A toast, he announced loudly, to modern nobility. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances immediately. Whitmore smiled toward Eleanor. After all, we now live in a kingdom where merchant daughters become duchesses overnight. The room went still. Adrian's expression darkened instantly, but Whitmore continued. Tell me, Your Grace, he said toward Eleanor. Did your father purchase the Duke before or after the war contracts? There it was, not merely an insult, an accusation, political corruption, financial manipulation, opportunistic marriage, dangerous allegations in front of the crown. Eleanor set down her fork carefully. Across the table, Adrian rose slowly to his feet. Every conversation in the ballroom died instantly. People feared Adrian when he became quiet. Whitmore laughed uneasily. Surely we can still joke. You will apologize, Adrian said coldly. The entire room froze, not because of the words, because of the tone. Whitmore scoffed nervously. You cannot be serious, Adrian stepped forward. I am deadly serious. Silence thickened across the ballroom. Eleanor stared at her husband in shock. This was not political performance anymore. This was personal. Whitmore attempted another laugh. Over her? The mistake left his mouth seconds before he realized it. Adrian's eyes turned terrifyingly calm. Yes, he answered softly, especially over her. People remembered moments like that. Not because they were loud, because truth revealed itself unexpectedly inside them. For the first time since their marriage, Adrian stopped protecting his pride more than his wife. Whitmore finally muttered an apology and sat down humiliated beneath dozens of watching eyes. But the damage was already done. Whispers spread immediately across the hall. Why was the Duke defending her now? What changed? What did he know? Eleanor barely touched the rest of her dinner, and Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. Later that night, rain hammered against palace windows while Eleanor stood alone inside the western gallery, staring at portraits of long-dead Ravenshire ancestors, men born into power, women married into silence. How much did you hear? Adrian asked quietly behind her. Enough. She did not turn around. Adrian approached slowly. I should have defended you sooner. Eleanor laughed bitterly. That would have required respecting me sooner. The truth hit hard because it was deserved. Adrian stopped beside her beneath the dim gallery lights. I was wrong about you. That does not undo what happened. No. He looked directly at her. But it matters to me anyway. Eleanor finally faced him then. And for the first time since their marriage, Adrian allowed every wall to lower completely. No arrogance, no title, no performance. Only honesty. I searched for you for 6 years, he admitted quietly, her breath caught. I visited military camps after the rebellion hoping someone knew your name. I kept the compass. I read survivor reports until I memorized them. His jaw tightened. And when I finally found you, I treated you like a stranger. Emotion flickered painfully across Eleanor's face. You were never supposed to know. Why? Because people change. Rain thundered outside. You were kind during the war, Eleanor continued softly. Exhausted soldiers trusted you. Refugees trusted you. I remembered that man. Her eyes met his. Then I met the Duke of Ravenshire instead. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. That hurt more than anger would have. Because somewhere along the years, power and grief had turned him colder than he realized. You still married me, he said. Eleanor looked away. My father needed the alliance. That is not the only reason. Silence answered him. And silence often revealed more than words. Before Adrian could speak again, hurried footsteps echoed through the gallery. A palace servant appeared pale with panic. Your Grace, the servant gasped. There's trouble outside. Minutes later, chaos exploded beyond the palace gates. A crowd had gathered carrying newspapers printed with fresh political accusations against Eleanor's family. Rivals in Parliament leaked false claims suggesting her father profited illegally during wartime supply shortages. Reporters swarmed the estate. Protesters shouted beyond iron gates. And suddenly Eleanor understood. This was never about marriage. It was about destroying her family's influence before spring elections. She cannot go outside, a palace advisor warned urgently. The press will tear her apart. Eleanor straightened immediately. Running would make us look guilty. Adrian turned sharply. You are not speaking to that mob. They are attacking my father, and they are waiting for weakness. So what do you suggest? She snapped. Hide upstairs while strangers decide who we are? The old Adrian would have ordered her silent. Tonight, he understood her too well for that. Fear comes later. That was how Eleanor survived. Finally, Adrian reached for her hand. The gesture shocked both of them. Warm, steady, protective. Then he said the one thing nobody in the kingdom expected from the Duke of Ravenshire. We face it together. Outside, camera flashes exploded the moment the palace doors opened. Journalists shouted questions instantly. Did the Duchess's family profit from wartime contracts? Was the marriage politically arranged? Is Parliament opening an investigation? Adrian stepped forward beside Eleanor beneath pouring rain. Power radiated from him naturally. But tonight, people noticed something else. He never released her hand. The Duchess of Ravenshire, Adrian said clearly, risked her life during the rebellion, saving civilians and wounded soldiers, including me. The crowd fell silent. Eleanor stared at him in shock. Adrian continued anyway. 6 years ago, while powerful men argued safely behind walls, she carried injured strangers through freezing water during Blackmere Crossing. His voice hardened. Any person questioning her character should first ask whether they have shown half the courage she did. Reporters erupted immediately. Questions, shouting, chaos. But none of it mattered now, because truth had finally entered the light. Eleanor looked at Adrian as rain soaked through both of them. Why would you tell them? She whispered. Because I am done allowing you to stand alone. Those words broke something open inside her, not dramatically. Quietly, like ice finally cracking after a brutal winter. For one long second, neither of them moved. Then Eleanor stepped closer and kissed him, not gently, not politely. Years of pain, anger, memory, loneliness, and impossible affection collided all at once beneath storm clouds and camera flashes. The crowd erupted, but Adrian barely heard them, because the woman he searched for across 6 years and half a kingdom was finally in his arms. And this time he knew exactly who she was. 3 months later, political investigations cleared Eleanor's family completely. Public support for the Duchess of Ravenshire soared after veterans from Blackmere Crossing came forward confirming her actions during the war. People loved redemption stories, especially when powerful men earned them the hard way. As for Adrian and Eleanor, their marriage did not become perfect overnight. Real love never worked that way. They still argued, still challenged one another, still carried scars pride could not erase easily. But slowly, the coldness inside Ravenshire Palace disappeared, room by room, season by season. And years later, when historians wrote about the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshire, they described them not as a political alliance, but as two stubborn survivors who found each other twice, once in war, and once again in love. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more intense royal drama, betrayal, revenge, and unforgettable love stories. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven the Duke or walked away forever?
Some love stories begin with passion, others begin with survival. But the ones people never forget are the stories where two broken people are forced to confront who they became after pain changed them. Adrian loved her too late. Eleanor forgave him slower than he deserved, and maybe that's what made it real. If this story pulled you in, subscribe now for more royal betrayal, revenge, forbidden love, and emotional drama every week. And before you go, tell me this: should Eleanor have forgiven the Duke or walked away forever?